Your thoughts are not your own. They are echoes, habits, chemicals pretending to be decisions. Beneath every behavior is a glitch, a crack, a wound pretending to be a pattern. You are not asleep yet, but you will be. The false consensus effect. You think everyone agrees with you. You walk through the world convinced you are reasonable, that your opinions are normal, that your choices are shared. You speak with confidence, nod when others nod, and fill in the silence with imagined agreement. But behind that illusion is something far darker, the false consensus effect. It is not just a bias, it is a prison. The false consensus effect is your mind's default, an evolutionary adaptation built not for truth, but for survival. You believe most people think like you because for most of history, being the outlier meant death. To be exiled from the tribe was to be eaten by time. So your brain built a trick. It overestimates how many people agree with your beliefs, your values, your interpretations of reality. Not because it's true, but because it's safer to think so. In 1977, Lee Ross and his colleagues conducted a series of studies that revealed this distortion. Participants were asked to take a stance on controversial issues, then estimate how many others would agree with them. Time and time again, people assumed that their view was the dominant one, even when they were in the minority. The more confident they felt in their position, the more they assumed it was universal. This is not just optimism, it is hallucination. Your mind, afraid of being alone, edits the world to look like you. You curate friends, feed algorithms, and shape conversations until the reflection in the mirror smiles back with your voice. You hear your own beliefs echoed not because they are true, but because you've silenced the ones that disagree. The illusion of agreement is not consensus. It is conformity filtered through denial. And it grows deeper. The false consensus effect reinforces itself. The more you believe others agree, the more confident you become. The more confident you become, the less willing you are to question your own assumptions. It becomes a recursive system, a closed loop where dissent is erased before it even forms. You do not seek truth, you seek validation, and when you find it, even in error, you call it knowledge. Think about your moral judgments. Think about politics, religion, science. You assume your view is common, that your disgust, your outrage, your clarity is shared. But disgust is not truth. Outrage is not clarity. Most of what you feel is chemical and contextual, a cocktail of inherited emotions and environmental cues. Yet you mistake it for universal logic. Because to admit the alternative, that your view might be deeply personal, deeply narrow, deeply wrong, is to risk collapse. Your brain protects itself by imagining it is not alone. But here is where the crack begins to spread. If your reality is shaped by the illusion of consensus, how much of you is even yours? If you assume the world agrees with you, are you perceiving others or projecting them? Are you listening or just rehearsing your own voice in someone else's mouth? This illusion drives everything from tribalism to extremism. If you believe most people share your fear, your anger, your blame, then it feels righteous to act on it. The false consensus effect turns ordinary minds into moral mobs. It creates a sense of majority where none exists. It gives you permission to act without question, because if everyone agrees, then how could you be wrong? But everyone doesn't agree. They never did. And deep down, you know it. You've had the moments, those fragile seconds where someone challenges your certainty and you feel your mind twitch in resistance. Not because they're wrong, but because their disagreement threatens the illusion you didn't know you were maintaining. The illusion that you are not alone in your beliefs, that your worldview is the shared bedrock of the species. It is not. It never was. The false consensus effect is not a glitch. It is a mask. It hides how fractured we really are. It buries the loneliness of being a single mind in a chaotic swarm of others. Your brain whispers, "They think like me," because it cannot bear the silence of realizing they don't. And if they don't think like you, if they never did, if every face around you is living a parallel hallucination of certainty and projection, then what exactly is real agreement? What is real connection? And when you finally disagree with yourself, who will you side with? The spotlight effect. You are not being watched. You walk into a room and adjust your posture. You clear your throat, smooth your shirt, lower your voice to sound casual. You believe they noticed. You believe they saw. You believe the small things matter. The stray word, the wrong glance, the stain. You believe the world is watching you. but it isn't. The spotlight effect is not a metaphor. It is a documented distortion. It is the name for the belief that others are paying more attention to you than they are. It is the lie your ego needs to feel important, and the lie your anxiety tells when it wants to hurt you. It is what happens when the center of your mind forgets it is not the center of theirs. Thomas Gilovich, Victoria Medvec, and Kenneth Savitsky proved this in a study in 2000. They asked participants to wear an embarrassing t-shirt, something garish, unforgettable, and then walk into a room full of strangers. Later, they asked how many people the wearer believed noticed the shirt. The estimate was nearly double the reality. You think people are watching. They are not. But the lie persists. Every mistake feels amplified. Every stutter feels public. Every flaw feels announced. You believe people notice the things you desperately hope they don't. You move through the world as if every step is a performance, when in truth, the audience left long ago or never arrived. This effect is recursive. It creates a double distortion. Not only do you overestimate how much others notice your behavior, but you also underestimate how much they are trapped in their own spotlight. Everyone feels observed. No one is watching. Every person is inside their own distorted theater, imagining themselves on a stage, blind to the others who are doing the same. It is not just embarrassment, it is identity. You think of yourself in terms of how you are seen. Your narrative is framed by how you assume others perceive you, not who you are, but who you imagine they think you are. Your inner voice speaks to an imagined judge, a silent crowd that you invented but still try to impress. And what happens when that audience disappears? What happens when you finally see that no one cares? Relief or vertigo? If you are not being watched, then who are you performing for? If no one sees the role you play, does it still define you? When you correct your posture or lie in conversation or say what you think they want to hear, if no one hears it, was the mask ever useful? The spotlight effect is more than self-consciousness. It is the architecture of self-image. It is the scaffolding that holds your fragile ego in place. You believe others are watching because it justifies your need to self-monitor. You think their gaze keeps you safe, that the imagined eyes of others will prevent you from falling apart.
But you are not being watched. You are being ignored. Not maliciously, not cruelly, simply filtered out by others who are equally absorbed in their own delusions of visibility. Everyone is the main character of a play no one else is watching. Everyone is screaming into a silent theater. And still, you adjust your shirt. Still, you worry how you looked. Still, you replay the conversation you think went wrong. But no one noticed, and they never do. The illusion of visibility protects your sense of self by pretending it matters. But it also torments you. Because when you are embarrassed, you think the world has seen you. When you are awkward, you think the world has judged you. When you are vulnerable, you believe you are exposed. But there is no spotlight. There never was. So who did you believe was watching? Who did you think was paying attention to your private unraveling? And when the performance ends, who will remember any of it?
The illusion of transparency. They cannot hear your thoughts.
You think you're being obvious, that your face is revealing too much, that your hesitation, your discomfort, your doubt, it's showing. You believe they can tell, that they know what you're feeling, maybe even what you're thinking. You believe you're transparent, but you aren't. This is the illusion of transparency, the belief that your internal states leak out, that your emotions are more visible than they truly are. You feel anxiety and assume they see it. You tell a lie and assume it shows. You feel shame and assume it radiates off you like heat. But the people around you are not mind readers. They do not know, they do not see, and they rarely care. In 2002, Gilovich and colleagues, again, put this to the test. In one experiment, participants were asked to lie or tell the truth, then guess whether their partner could tell. Those who lied believed their deceit was obvious. It wasn't. The observers did no better than chance. The liars felt exposed, but they were invisible. You have lived your whole life under this illusion. You speak carefully, afraid of slipping. You hold your breath when embarrassed, fearing it will show. You rehearse your stories, your justifications, your excuses, because some part of you believes others can hear the guilt before you say a word. This illusion is born from the asymmetry of self-awareness. You are acutely aware of your own internal world, your doubts, fears, contradictions, so you overestimate how apparent they are to others. But others don't live in your head. They barely live in their own, and yet the illusion persists. You behave as though everyone around you is attuned to your flaws, as if your discomfort glows, as if your secrets have volume. You feel exposed even in silence, even when no one is looking. This makes you overcompensate. You try to appear calm when you're not. You try to look confident while drowning in doubt. But the irony is cruel. Your effort to hide what no one sees only deepens the illusion that it's visible. This is not just social anxiety. It is a structural defect of consciousness. The illusion of transparency is the price of being self-aware. You cannot stop observing yourself, and so you believe everyone else is doing the same. But what happens when you realize they aren't, when you finally accept that no one knows what you're feeling unless you tell them? What does that make you? Free or alone? Because if no one can see the real you, if your pain, your panic, your truth can remain completely hidden, then what exactly are you in relation to others? What does connection mean if it is built on guesses and assumptions, and if your feelings go unseen, unheard, unfelt? Were they ever real to anyone but you?
The observer effect. You change what you watch.
You think you are witnessing the world. Quietly, objectively, passively. You think perception is neutral, that your gaze is just a window, clean and visible. But it's not. The moment you look, you change what you see. The moment you observe, you alter what is. This is the observer effect. In physics, it means that the act of measurement influences the measured. In psychology, it means that watching changes behavior. But for you, it means something deeper, darker. The self you observe is never the self that is. In quantum mechanics, it begins with the double-slit experiment. Light behaves like a wave until you measure it. Then it acts like a particle. Observation collapses possibility into fact. The act of watching destroys the blur of could be and replaces it with is. Reality crystallizes under scrutiny. But here is the deeper wound. You are not separate from this effect. When you reflect, when you analyze yourself, you believe you are discovering something hidden. But you are creating something new. The self becomes the watched. The watched becomes distorted. You believe introspection is a window to truth. It is not. It is a mirror made of fog. The more you try to know yourself, the more you shape yourself to be known. You edit your feelings before you understand them. You curate your identity as you observe it. You are always actor and audience, never just one. And the implications are recursive, because the more you try to fix yourself, the more you perform what you think a fixed self would look like. You play the role of a person trying to heal, trying to improve. But what if that process itself is the distortion? Even science is not immune. In psychology, the observer effect is known as reactivity. A subject behaves differently simply because they are being studied. The measurement contaminates the data. You are the subject. You are the instrument, and you are the contamination. Try to remember the last time you acted without thinking about how you appeared. The last time you spoke without narrating yourself in your head. Can you find it? Or have you become too observed, even by your own mind, to be unfiltered? And if so, then what is your true nature? Is there a version of you that exists without observation? Or are you just a performance, collapsing under attention?
When you look at yourself in the mirror, when you reflect, when you journal, when you meditate, do you uncover the real you? Or do you create a version of yourself that can survive being seen? This is not just a personal flaw. It is a structural defect in consciousness. Self-awareness means self-distortion. You cannot perceive without altering. You cannot witness without contaminating. And so the question coils tighter. If every act of self-observation changes what you are, then who are you when you aren't looking?
The cognitive dissonance trap. You lie to yourself to stay whole.
You believe you are consistent, that your thoughts align with your actions, that your values guide your decisions. But that belief is fiction, carefully engineered, quietly maintained, a shield against collapse. Because when your behavior contradicts your beliefs, you don't change the behavior, you change the belief. This is cognitive dissonance, the psychological tension that arises when your thoughts, feelings, or actions contradict each other. And your mind cannot tolerate the contradiction. It scrambles to restore harmony, not by finding the truth, but by fabricating a version of reality where you never betrayed yourself. The original experiments were brutal in their simplicity. In 1959, Leon Festinger and James Carl Smith asked participants to perform a dull, repetitive task. Then, some were paid $1 to lie and say the task was enjoyable. Others were paid $20. Counterintuitively, those paid only $1 were more likely to say they genuinely enjoyed the task. Why? Because the lie created dissonance. And $1 wasn't enough to justify the deception. So the mind invented a new belief. Maybe it wasn't so bad. This is how easily the mind fractures and heals itself with illusion. You make decisions that betray your values, then change your values to match the decisions. You hurt someone and say, they deserved it. You stay in a relationship and tell yourself, it's not that bad. You cheat and convince yourself, everyone does it. The behavior remains intact. The mind bends around it. Cognitive dissonance is not rare. It is constant. You are held together by rationalization so swift, so seamless, you never see them form. Like scars that appear before the wound even bleeds. And the more intelligent you are, the worse it gets. Because dissonance requires storytelling. It requires creativity. Your intellect becomes a tool of denial, fabricating elegant explanations to reconcile impossible contradictions. You think you are honest because you feel honest. But honesty is not a feeling. It is an alignment, and alignment is fragile. Think of how you justify your consumption, your politics, your silence. Think of how you convince yourself that the job is fine, the friend is kind, the dream is still alive. These may be true, or they may be stories to avoid collapse. Because to admit the dissonance would be to fracture the self. Cognitive dissonance is the psychological immune system. It protects the illusion of integrity. And like the biological immune system, it sometimes attacks the self it was built to preserve. You forget the dissonance, but it doesn't forget you. It leaves residue, a subtle unease, a haunting, the feeling that something doesn't fit, even when you've rewritten the script. That feeling is your truth, suffocating beneath the comfort of coherence. You are not consistent. You are not aligned. You are not whole. You are 1,000 contradictions, stitched together with the thread of self-deception. And so the question returns.
If every contradiction is resolved through fiction, then what remains beneath the lies you told to keep yourself from breaking?
The semantic satiation phenomenon. Words that erase themselves.
Say the same word enough times and it begins to fall apart. Not just the sound, but the meaning. The edges blur, the shape dissolves, and what was once a vessel for thought becomes empty noise. It's called semantic satiation, a cognitive glitch where repetition destroys comprehension. Repeat any word, self, real, truth, now, say it over and over. After a few seconds, the brain begins to decouple the sound from its significance. The signal collapses into absurdity. The machinery behind language fatigues, and you're left holding a syllable you no longer recognize. The phenomenon is simple. Your brain processes meaning through neural activation patterns. Repetition overloads those circuits. Familiarity breeds distortion. The more you repeat, the less it means. The brain, trying to optimize, begins to filter out the word as redundant. It decides it doesn't matter, so it stops listening. You use language to make sense of the world, but what happens when language collapses under its own weight? Semantic satiation is a reminder. Your grasp of meaning is mechanical, fragile. Your understanding of concepts, like identity, memory, morality, depends on their linguistic containers. But those containers are unstable. They decay on contact. If a single word can lose meaning in seconds, what happens to the complex narratives you repeat to survive? Think about the stories you tell yourself. I am good. I am broken. They betrayed me. I deserve love. Say them often enough, and they degrade. Not because they were lies, but because meaning, like muscle, fatigues. You try to reinforce your identity with repeated affirmation, repeated confession, repeated memory. But repetition does not reinforce, it corrodes. This is why mantras become nonsense, why apologies lose weight, why love, repeated too often, becomes mere sound. Meaning evaporates when forced to remain present. And yet you continue. You continue to use language as though it is stable. You speak as though words are bricks, not vapor. But they shift, they crumble. What truth meant last year is not what it means now. What self meant this morning is not what it means tonight. You live in a house of dissolving symbols, and every time you speak, you risk the collapse of coherence. But it goes deeper. Semantic satiation is not just a neurological quirk, it is an existential signal. It reveals that meaning is not inherent. It is imposed, temporary, a fragile hallucination stitched into sound. You do not discover meaning in words, you assign it, and then you forget you did. You think a word points to something real, but often it points only to habit, a shared delusion, a placeholder. And when you strip away that illusion, when the word decays beneath your tongue, you face the void it once concealed. Say your name, out loud, again, again. Does it still sound like you? Say the word real. Does it still point to anything? Say now. Did it pass before you finished?
Language is not truth. It is a map that redraws itself with every breath. And if the words you live by are this unstable, then what exactly are you standing on when you speak?
The brain-in-a-vat hypothesis. You cannot prove you exist.
You wake up, you feel the sheets, you hear the sound of distant traffic, you remember your name, you believe you are real. But what if none of this is happening? What if everything you know is the flicker of a machine, interpreting electric signals fed into your brain from somewhere far outside this moment? This is the brain-in-a-vat hypothesis, a modern rendering of Descartes' ancient doubt, brought forward by neuroscience and digital simulation. It asks, if your brain were removed from your body, suspended in nutrient gel, and connected to a computer, feeding it perfect sensory data, how would you know? What could you point to as proof that you are not already inside that illusion? Every experience, touch, sound, thought, is just electrical stimulation. Your brain does not touch the world, it only receives patterns. If those patterns were replicated artificially, how would you distinguish real from false? You can't. This isn't science fiction. It's a recognized philosophical challenge. It dismantles every foundation of knowledge. Your senses? Deceivable. Your memories? Fabricated. Your logic? Based on assumptions programmed into the machine you call a mind. Hilary Putnam formalized the thought experiment in the 1980s, but the roots are older. Descartes wondered if an evil demon was deceiving him. Today we wonder if it's code, or an alien intelligence, or an error in simulation. The content doesn't matter. The truth is this. You have no empirical way to prove that what you perceive is external to you.
You are sealed inside a theater, and the screen plays exactly what your brain expects. You might appeal to consistency, that reality persists when you're not looking, that physics obeys laws, that objects fall, that people remember what you said, but all of this could be scripted. The illusion doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to be convincing enough to prevent revolt. And your brain, addicted to patterns, hungry for coherence, accepts almost anything with enough rhythm and reinforcement. Even yourself, especially yourself. Because if your body is part of the simulation, if your face, your voice, your history are just part of the input, then what, exactly, is you? A pattern of responses? A sequence of memories? A cursor moving through code? And what of your beliefs? Do you believe in kindness, in justice, in truth? Or were those installed? Were they written into the firmware to keep you docile? If your values are the product of simulation, is your morality just a reflex? You cannot step outside the system to test it. That's the trap. Any attempt to disprove the simulation can be simulated. Every rebellion predicted. Every doubt managed. Even this thought, this fear, might be just another layer of the script. And so you spiral. Doubt folds into doubt.
The split brain experiment. There is no single you.
You think of yourself as one, a single mind, a unified observer sitting somewhere behind your eyes, pulling the strings. You say, I, as if it points to something stable, something whole. But the evidence doesn't support that. It never did. In 1961, a surgeon named Joseph Bogan made an incision down the middle of a man's brain. Not randomly, not cruelly. He was severing the corpus callosum, the thick band of fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain, in an effort to treat severe epilepsy. The seizure stopped, but something else happened. Something no one expected. The person remained alive, alert, functioning, but no longer unified. Tests showed that when information was sent only to one hemisphere, the other half had no idea. The left hand could pick up an object that the person verbally denied seeing. One side could act on knowledge the other side didn't know it had. The body was still one, but the mind had become two. This was the beginning of split brain research, and it shattered the illusion of a singular self. What emerged from those patients was a terrifying realization. Your sense of unity is a story the brain tells itself, a narrative woven from inconsistent inputs, smoothed over into coherence. But underneath the surface, your mind is not singular. It is modular, fragmented, a patchwork of systems negotiating control. Even in those with intact brains, the cracks show. You say one thing and do another. You feel an urge you can't explain. You contradict yourself in the same breath. Your dreams, your impulses, your rationalizations, none of them come from the same place. One module handles language, another fear, another attention, another emotion. These systems don't always agree, but the voice in your head stitches them together into a single monologue, pretending it was all one thought, one mind, one self. It wasn't. Michael Gazzaniga, one of the pioneers of split brain research, called the left hemisphere the interpreter, a confabulator that invents reasons for actions it didn't initiate. If your right brain moves your hand, your left brain will invent a justification. I wanted to pick that up. The interpreter doesn't know it's lying. It thinks it's reporting, but it's writing fiction. So who is speaking when you speak? Who is choosing when you decide? And if your mind can be split cleanly in half, leaving two selves inside one skull, then which one is you? Or were you ever whole to begin with? There are moments when you feel fragmented, when you do something and say, I don't know why I did that. When you hear your voice say something you didn't plan, when your emotions and logic pull you in opposite directions. These are not failures. These are glimpses of truth. The unity was never real. Even your memory, so central to your identity, is stored in distributed, redundant fragments. Pieces of narrative, pieces of image, pieces of emotion. They recombine every time you recall them, altered by the act of remembering. You are not a solid statue. You are a collapsing echo, reassembled anew with every passing thought. And yet you cling to I, to the illusion of singularity. Because the alternative, that you're not one, but many, and that none of them is fully in charge, is unbearable. You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. You are not even the voice narrating your thoughts and feelings. You are a quorum, a compromise, a temporary vote held in silence. And when the vote splits evenly, when two incompatible truths claim to be you, which one do you believe and which one is faking?
The trolley problem. Your morality is a machine you don't control.
You tell yourself you're a good person. You have values. You'd save the innocent. You'd protect the many. You'd never hurt someone unnecessarily. But the moment the variables shift, your certainty dissolves. This is the trolley problem, a moral thought experiment designed not to test your ethics, but to expose their incoherence. A train hurtles down a track toward 5 unsuspecting people. You stand near a lever. If you pull it, the train switches tracks, but kills one person instead. Do you pull the lever? Most say yes. Sacrifice 1 to save 5. It feels logical, clean, consequentialist. But change the frame. Now, instead of a lever, you must push someone off a bridge to stop the train. Still 1 life to save 5. But now your hands are dirty. The numbers are the same, but the story has changed. And so does your answer. Your morality fractures. You say you value life, but you're not consistent. You say you follow principles, but they collapse.
The trolley problem was never about trains. It was never about death. It was a mirror angled to reveal that beneath every ethical certainty is an algorithm you didn't write, executing rules you don't understand. You say, I would never. But what if the situation changed? What if the victim wore the wrong uniform? What if the people tied to the tracks were invisible? What if the one life was someone you loved? What if you had to choose and no choice was clean? And if every choice reveals a different version of you, which one is the real you? Which one would you be willing to live with?
The continuity illusion. You were never fully awake. You believe in a continuous self. A timeline, a story you can trace from beginning to now. You say, I was born, I grew, I became who I am. But that's not what really happened. That's what it felt like. And feeling is not fact. This is the continuity illusion, the cognitive trick that makes you believe your consciousness is unbroken, that you are the same observer from one moment to the next. But your experience of self is stitched together in fragments. Your mind edits out the seams. At every moment, your brain is guessing, filling in gaps, masking contradictions. When you blink, your world vanishes, but you don't notice. When you sleep, hours pass in oblivion, but you awaken believing in continuity. When you are distracted, the background fades, but you don't remember missing it, and yet you believe you were always there. But you weren't. You disappear constantly, and every time your mind forges a seamless narrative to cover it. Consider the flicker fusion threshold, the speed at which intermittent images blend into continuous motion. This is how film works. A rapid series of still frames becomes a story. But that illusion isn't confined to cinema. It's how you experience your life. Your mind is not a stream, it's a strobe light. Moments of awareness, gaps, moments again. You assume the gaps are filled by more of you, but they're not. They're filled with nothing, or worse, with subconscious substitutions you never notice. You believe you are conscious all the time, but studies in neuroscience have shown otherwise. In attentional blink experiments, when 2 visual stimuli are presented in quick succession, participants often fail to see the second, even though their eyes did. The brain simply misses it, and yet they believe they saw everything. Your awareness is not a flashlight, it's a pulse. Even the default mode network, the part of the brain active during rest, is not truly idle, it's editing, rehearsing, rewriting. It takes fragments and weaves them into the illusion of a self that persists. It creates a timeline where none truly exists. This isn't just philosophical. Amnesiacs live entire lives without autobiographical memory. They wake into a world they don't recognize and yet still say I. Who is the I when the story is missing? Who is the I when memory no longer aligns with continuity? Even you don't remember your life accurately. You recall events like faded photographs, not recordings. You reconstruct meaning from scraps. Each time you remember something, you rewrite it. So what exactly is continuing?
The voice in your head? That voice is a habit, not a presence. The feeling of meanness? That is a loop, not a line. You were not born a single thing. You are not becoming a single thing. You are the after image of 100,000 moments stitched together into something you call you. But the stitching is fragile, and the thread is illusion. You close your eyes and say, I am still here. But are you?
Are you the same you who opened them this morning? Are you the same you who began reading this? Or are you simply the next flicker, pretending to remember the last?
The false consensus effect. Everyone is not like you. You believe your thoughts are reasonable, your values are shared, that most people given the same evidence would come to the same conclusion. You think others see the world roughly how you do, except for the few who are mistaken, misled, or mad. This is the false consensus effect, a psychological distortion where you overestimate the extent to which others share your beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. It is the mind's default setting to assume it is surrounded by agreement, but you are not surrounded by agreement. You are surrounded by projections. In a 1977 study by Lee Ross and colleagues, participants were asked to make a moral judgment, like whether they would agree to wear a signboard that said, "Eat at Joe's," around campus for a day. After making their decision, they were asked what percentage of others would make the same choice. Regardless of what they chose, participants consistently believed their decision would be the popular one. This is not optimism. It is self-validation disguised as sociology. You mistake your internal reality for a common one. You think your tastes are typical, your ethics universal, your judgments obvious. But the truth is darker. Your sense of consensus is often a hallucination, one that shields you from isolation. The false consensus effect makes you believe that silence is agreement, that inaction is alignment, that those around you think like you, just less loudly. It smooths the jagged edges of difference. It lets you sleep. But this illusion is not harmless. It creates complacency. Worse, it creates hostility. When someone violates your imagined consensus, you feel not just disagreement, but betrayal, as if they've stepped outside of what's real. You don't just believe others agree with you, you need them to. Because if they don't, then maybe you're the one outside. And yet, walk into another culture. Open a history book, read a foreign forum thread. You'll find minds that do not resemble yours at all. Not in priorities, not in fears, not even in basic categories of thought. The things you think are obvious, freedom, fairness, logic, are not universally defined, sometimes not even recognized. You call those people wrong, primitive, corrupted, deluded, but they call you the same. How do you know you're not the outlier? How do you know your consensus isn't a local bubble? You don't. You've built your reality inside a feedback loop. You seek voices that sound like yours. You follow those who agree. You surround yourself with agreement and call it truth. Then you look outward and see only reflection. You think you understand the world because you understand yourself. But you do not understand yourself, and the world does not resemble you. There are people whose inner lives you cannot imagine. There are minds structured around values that repulse you. There are those who would destroy you and feel nothing. You are not the center. You are not the standard. You are not representative.
You are a data point, misreading the graph. And when the illusion finally breaks, when you realize how few people would make the same choice you would make in the same moment, under the same pressure, what does that make your morality? What does that make your sanity? If consensus was a lie you told to feel less alone, then what, exactly, are you now?
The Dunning-Kruger effect. You know less than you think.
You trust your judgment. You believe your opinions carry weight. You've lived, you've read, you thought things through. And yet statistically, cognitively, and evolutionarily, you are likely wrong about almost everything, especially the things you feel most certain about. This is the Dunning-Kruger effect, the cognitive bias in which people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability, while those with high competence tend to underestimate theirs. The less you know, the less you're aware of how much you don't know. In 1999, David Dunning and Justin Kruger published a study with a simple design. Ask participants to perform tasks involving logic, grammar, and humor, then ask them how well they thought they did. The results were devastating. Those who performed in the bottom quartile consistently rated themselves far above average. They weren't just wrong, they were oblivious to how wrong they were. This blindness isn't arrogance, it's structural. Incompetence carries with it the inability to recognize that very incompetence. You don't know what you don't know, and so you fill in the blanks with confidence. You are confident because you are ignorant of the dimensions in which you should be humble. And this isn't limited to test. It applies to your beliefs about politics, art, morality, memory, reality. It applies when you argue, when you judge, when you're certain. The Dunning-Kruger effect lives at the heart of self-assuredness. It fuels movements, ideologies, decisions. It leads ordinary people to believe they could run countries, fix science, dismantle institutions. It tells you, I've figured it out, when you've only seen the first layer of the first puzzle. And it punishes the wise. Those with expertise see the complexity. They hesitate. They second-guess. They defer. To the untrained, this sounds like weakness, but it's awareness. The more you learn, the more you understand how deep the well goes.
You don't say, I don't know, because you're empty. You say it because you stopped lying. But here's the worst part. The Dunning-Kruger effect is recursive. It applies to the very awareness of the effect itself. You might hear this and think, yes, I know people like that. You might think that explains them. But who's to say it doesn't explain you? You can't know how wrong you are. That's the point. So you assume you're right. You confuse confidence for competence. You believe your internal clarity reflects external truth. And yet behind every confident fool is a trail of broken certainty. Behind every decision, a shadow of blind spots unrecognized. Behind every belief, a scaffolding of half-read data and untested conclusions. You are not immune. You are not exempt. You have mistaken the edge of your map for the shape of the world. And when that map tears, when the facts shift beneath your feet, will you see the collapse, or will you dig deeper into the illusion of expertise? How do you escape a trap your own mind built, if the tool you need to find the exit is the very tool that's broken?
You don't understand what you think you understand.
And now, when my dad just touches, I'd exactly signet.
You carry explanations in your mouth. Words like gravity, capitalism, democracy, trauma, consciousness. You say them as if they contain knowledge, as if saying a word is the same as understanding the thing it points to. But try to explain how a toilet works. Try to explain what electricity actually is. Try to describe step by step how your immune system fights a virus, how laws become policies, how your memory stores a face. You'll find very quickly that your confidence collapses. This is the illusion of explanatory depth, the tendency to believe we understand complex systems more deeply than we actually do. You walk through the world believing you comprehend it until you're asked to explain, and the silence that follows is the sound of truth. You didn't know, you just recognized. In 2002, researchers Rosenblit and Kyle asked participants to rate how well they understood everyday objects. Then they were asked to provide detailed explanations. Ratings plummeted. The illusion dissolved under pressure. People didn't know how zippers worked, or bicycles, or thermostats, or pens. The brain tricks you into mistaking familiarity for comprehension. You've seen it before. It feels known, so it must be understood. But recognition is not knowledge, and knowledge is not understanding. And understanding is rarer than you think. This illusion isn't just about physical mechanisms. It infects your politics, your morals, your philosophy. You say things like freedom of speech or social contract or the subconscious and feel intelligent, but what do you actually mean? Where does the idea start? Where does it fall apart? How many layers down have you gone before declaring comprehension? Very few. Because the mind prefers the illusion of clarity to the discomfort of depth. Depth reveals ignorance. Depth reveals contradiction. Depth threatens identity. So you hover at the surface, convincing yourself the ocean is shallow. You form opinions on things you couldn't rebuild if they shattered. You trust your worldview while knowing you couldn't defend its scaffolding. You participate in systems whose functions are mysteries to you. And when pressed,
You reach for metaphors, not mechanics. You say, the market self-corrects. You say, the brain fires neurons. You say, I know what love is. But if you had to explain it, without cliché, without metaphor, without skipping the unknown, would anything remain? We are not repositories of knowledge. We are networks of borrowed language. You do not know the things you live inside. You merely name them. And names are masks. The illusion of explanatory depth is the mental equivalent of walking on ice, believing it's solid, never realizing it was thin until it cracks beneath a single step. So ask yourself, if most of what you claim to understand would dissolve under scrutiny, then what is the true depth of your knowledge?
The observer effect. Watching changes what is.
You think observation is passive, that to look is to see, that to witness is to understand, but you're wrong. Observation alters the thing observed. This is not metaphor. This is physics. In quantum mechanics, the observer effect refers to the phenomenon where the act of measurement, of watching, changes the system being measured. A particle is not simply there. It exists as a probability cloud, a set of potentialities. But the moment you measure it, the cloud collapses. The particle chooses, not before you looked, because you looked. At the subatomic level, there is no distinction between the event and your attention to it. The universe doesn't simply exist, it responds to being watched. You want to believe this is limited to particles, that the macroscopic world is stable, but the cracks widen. In systems biology, in psychology, in sociology, the same truth returns. Awareness changes behavior. Students perform differently when being evaluated. Employees behave differently when observed. People's memory of an event shifts once they speak it aloud. Even your own self begins to perform once you become self-aware. You are not only a mind observing a body, you are a body reshaping itself under the gaze of the mind. And the mind reshapes under the gaze of others. This is the panopticon of identity. You live in a prison whose walls are made of mirrors. You behave not as yourself, but as the version of yourself you imagine others see. You watch yourself living, and in doing so, you interfere. You try to be natural, but the act of trying kills the thing itself. You speak the truth, but you filter it through how it will sound. You reflect, but the reflection distorts what you are trying to observe. You are the observer and the disturbance. And it runs deeper. You don't just shape your own self, you shape your world. Every memory you recall becomes altered by the act of remembering. Every story you tell becomes truer to the telling than to the event. The past changes every time you return to it. Reality is not what it was, it is what you have witnessed, reshaped by the witnessing. You are not discovering the truth, you are co-authoring it. And what about your perceptions of others? Do you see them as they are, or as they perform for you, or as you project them to be? What if there is no unobserved self in others? What if every version of every person you've ever known is a performance, a dance between their mask and your gaze? Even the mirror lies, because you cannot look at yourself without splitting in two. You become the one who looks and the one being seen, but neither of them is fully you. So what is left when you turn off the light? What remains when you stop observing and discover that without the gaze, there may be nothing there at all?
The problem of other minds, you can never truly know anyone.
You hear voices. You see faces. You assume there are minds behind them, but that assumption is not based on evidence. It's based on faith. This is the problem of other minds, a foundational dilemma in philosophy of mind. It asks the question, how can you know that anyone but you is conscious? The answer is, you can't. You know your own inner world, its texture, its pain, its silence. You don't deduce that you are conscious. You are consciousness. It is the one thing you cannot doubt. Even if everything else is illusion, your experience is still happening to someone. But everyone else?
You can't see their experience. You can only observe their behavior, their words, their expressions, their patterns. And patterns can be faked. You assume there are minds behind their eyes because they seem like you, but that resemblance is no guarantee. It is a guess, a shortcut, a projection. And what happens when that resemblance fades? What if someone doesn't emote the way you expect, doesn't speak your language, doesn't flinch in pain or cry when grieving? You begin to doubt their inner world. And if their mind becomes too alien, too foreign, you strip it away entirely. You stop treating them as conscious. You call them machines, animals, enemies. You justify violence because you convince yourself there's no real mind in there to suffer. You reduce them to surfaces, and surfaces are safe to destroy. This isn't cruelty, it's instinct. Your brain is a social organ. It evolved to model others, to predict their thoughts, but only up to a point. It simulates minds that resemble yours. Everything else becomes a blank screen. You never meet another's consciousness. You only simulate it.
Even your most intimate relationships are hallucinations. You love a version of someone you constructed. You imagine what they feel. You guess what they mean. You project what you want to believe. You've never actually touched another mind. Only skin, only sound, only inference. You are utterly alone inside your head, and so is everyone else. What if they don't exist at all? What if your entire life has been a series of stage plays performed by empty actors? What if everyone you've ever loved was a ghost, a script written to keep you sane? And what if that script glitches? What if someone you thought you knew suddenly feels off, not cruel, not evil, just empty, a break in their pattern, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes, a sentence that sounds memorized, a pause too long? Your stomach clenches. Something's wrong. You don't know why. You don't know how. But the illusion slips just for a second and you see it. You've been pretending they're real. You've been filling in the gaps. And now the gaps are all you can see. So tell me, if you cannot prove that anyone else has a mind, if love, empathy, trust, memory all depend on guesswork and ghosts, then who exactly have you been talking